100 feet above the ground. At that height, the canopy of the Vietnam jungle becomes a blur of green. You are not inside the aircraft. You are hanging out of the open door, strapped into a vibrating frame. 2,000 rounds of ammunition sit in a box between your legs. Your fingers rest on the spade grips of an M60 machine gun. How did these men survive the most dangerous job in the sky? The odds were against them. But without their fire, the infantry on the ground was finished. The gunner has no armor. No bulletproof glass protects his chest. Only the heavy machine gun in his hands offers a sense of security. He scans the tree line for the muzzle flash of an AK-47. He watches for the heavy thud of a .51 caliber machine gun. Most of all, he fears the 23mm anti-aircraft cannons. Those weapons do not just wound, they disintegrate helicopters in mid-air. It was a cycle of power and helplessness. From the air, the gunner could rain down hundreds of bullets per minute. He could level a village or clear a landing zone in seconds. But one lucky shot from a hidden sniper could end his life instantly. At first glance, a chaos of noise and smoke, but in reality, a calculated game of survival. The footage shows the gunner's face is covered in oil and sweat. His eyes never stop moving. The wind pulls at his flight suit. The sound of the rotor blades drowns out everything except the scream of the engine. There was no room for error. If the gun jammed, the helicopter became a target. If the gunner blinked, the enemy disappeared back into the brush. It got worse. During a hot landing zone insertion, the helicopter slows down. It hovers. It becomes a stationary bird in a shooting gallery. The gunner must suppress the entire perimeter alone. He fires until the barrel glows red. He swaps hot steel for cold with bare hands or thin gloves. This role required a specific type of soldier. Not everyone could handle the height, the heat, and the constant threat of a vertical drop. Events accelerated during the mid-60s. As the war expanded, the demand for these door gunners tripled. Young men were pushed into the sky with minimal training. They learned the rhythm of combat through the sights of their weapons. The camera records. Empty brass casings carpet the floor of the Huey. The gunner leans out further to get a better angle. There is no fear in his movements, only mechanical precision. The mission was simple: protect the ship, protect the men inside. Thus, the door gunner became the symbol of the air cavalry. 1961. At the start of the Vietnam War, a standard helicopter crew was small. It consisted of a pilot, a co-pilot, and a crew chief. The crew chief doubled as the door gunner. But the reality of jungle warfare changed the math. Heavy casualties and downed aircraft proved that one gun was not enough. The helicopters were vulnerable from the opposite side. The military added a fourth man. They called him the shotgun rider. He occupied one of the most dangerous positions in modern combat. How did he stay inside? A single nylon tether, known as a monkey strap, held him to the fuselage. The gunner spent hours leaning out of an open door over open air. There was no armor. There were no walls. He was a primary target for every sniper in the tree line. Accidents were frequent. In the chaos of sharp turns and heavy turbulence, gunners fell. The footage often shows men dangling by their straps against the side of the aircraft. The crew would drop their weapons to haul them back inside. Others were not as lucky. The straps snapped or the buckles failed. These men flew the highest stakes missions. They covered medical evacuations. They provided direct fire support for pinned down infantry. They suppressed North Vietnamese positions during hot landings. Training was brutal. It had to be. Recruits learned the intercom system first. Communication was the only way to survive. They practiced assisting the crew chief with mechanical failures under pressure. They mastered the clock system to call out enemy positions. 12 o'clock was the nose. 6 o'clock was the tail. They learned to fly in tight formations, weaving their fire between friendly rotors. The primary tool of the trade was the M60 machine gun. It weighed 23 pounds. The gunners also carried an M14 or M16 rifle as a backup for when the helicopter went down. The M60 was a heavy hitter. It fired up to 650 rounds per minute. The effective range was 1,300 yards. In the field, crews modified the weapons. Some used swivel mounts. Others preferred a pintle mount for stability. Some gunners even hung the machine gun from a bungee cord attached to the ceiling. This allowed for maximum movement and faster target acquisition. But for heavy contact, they used the M134 minigun. These were common on dedicated gunships. The rate of fire was 6,000 rounds per minute. It sounded like a chainsaw. The weight was the enemy. Depending on the mission, they carried between 2,000 and 4,000 rounds of ammunition. The gunner had to track his heat and his belt count. If he ran dry during a takeoff, the squad on the ground was dead. The visual of a door gunner in action is distinct. Every fifth round in the belt was a tracer. These glowing projectiles allowed the gunner to walk his fire onto the target. In the dark of the canopy, the red streak showed exactly where the bullets hit. The mission ended only when the fuel ran low. Thus ended another day in the air. Low visibility was the standard. Door gunners faced two distinct assignments: slicks or gunships. Slicks, specifically the UH-1 Huey, functioned as the primary transport workhorse. Their mission profile included troop insertion, hauling supplies, and medical evacuations. On a slick, the door gunner occupied a defensive role. His primary objective was protecting the aircraft during its most vulnerable moments, takeoffs and landings. He operated an M60 machine gun. Gunships were a different breed. These helicopters were heavily armed platforms built for offensive strikes. Here, the door gunner was a core member of an attack team. They delivered close air support to soldiers on the ground using rockets, high-speed miniguns, and grenade launchers. Military engineers tried to mount the heavy 50 caliber machine gun on these frames. It failed. The weapon was too heavy for the airframe to handle effectively. Training was rigorous. Gunners learned to fire from multiple positions and extreme angles based on the shifting needs of the mission. Coordination with the pilot was mandatory. The pilot would bank or pivot the helicopter to align the airframe with the gunner's specific field of fire. The camera footage shows the difficulty of this task. Accuracy was the ultimate challenge. A helicopter is never a stable platform. It moves at high speeds. It tilts at sharp angles. It changes altitude constantly while maneuvering to dodge incoming tracer fire. The gunner had to track moving targets while compensating for these variables. Constant vibration from the engine shook the weapon. Wind resistance pushed against the barrel. Stabilizing the gun was nearly impossible. The manual provided a specific theory. It taught gunners to fire in short bursts of 5 to 7 rounds. The gunner was supposed to pause, assess where the tracers hit, and adjust his aim. Reality looked different. In combat, gunners compensated for inaccuracy with a massive volume of fire. The sound of continuous fire drowned out the radio. Gunners typically swept the entire landing zone, firing in wide arcs to suppress the enemy. This forced the opposition to stay down. They also had to master the art of leading the target. Because the helicopter moved forward, the bullets carried the aircraft's momentum. This meant aiming behind or below the actual target to ensure a hit. There was no room for error. If the gunner stopped firing, the enemy moved in. It was a game of physics and lead. This was the life of the door gunner. Physics dictated the trajectory. Every bullet fired was subject to the forward momentum of the helicopter. Gunners could never aim directly at a target on the ground. They calculated wind speed, air density, and the movement of the aircraft. It was a constant game of mental geometry. One mistake meant the rounds landed 50 meters off target. The weight limit was the primary enemy. Helicopters required a light frame to stay airborne in the humid jungle heat. Heavy steel plating was not an option. Unlike armored ground vehicles, these cabins were thin shells of aluminum and plexiglass. A standard rifle round could pass through both sides of the aircraft without slowing down. Personal protection was minimal. Standard-issue flak jackets were provided to the crew. The material was thick and cumbersome. In the 100-degree heat of the cabin, the vests became soaked in sweat within minutes. These jackets only stopped small shrapnel fragments. A direct hit from an AK-47 went straight through the fabric. Equipment served specific functions. Gunners wore flight helmets with integrated intercom systems. This wasn't for ballistic protection. It was the only way to hear over the roar of the turbine and the wind. The crew also had access to ceramic plates known as chicken plates. These heavy inserts covered the chest and could stop small arms fire. The nickname was a psychological trap. Many soldiers refused to wear the ceramic plates because of the bulk. Others avoided them to prove their bravery. In their eyes, only a coward, a chicken, needed the extra weight. Most crews simply sat on the plates to protect themselves from fire coming through the floor. The door gunner acted as the primary sensor. They scanned the tree line for a flicker of light or a wisp of smoke. The Viet Cong were masters of camouflage. Spotting a hidden bunker from a moving aircraft required a veteran eye. In the frame, a blur of green jungle passing at 90 knots. Identification was a deadly gamble. There were no thermal cameras or high-resolution sensors. From 500 feet up, a farmer and a guerrilla looked identical. This led to frequent tragedies. Friendly fire incidents were common. Innocent civilians were often caught in the crossfire of a panicked crew. The technology of the era was primitive. No night vision goggles existed for these units. No drones provided overhead reconnaissance. Decisions to open fire happened in a split second based on a glimpse of movement. The enemy exploited this confusion by blending into the local population. Age was no barrier in the jungle. The Viet Cong utilized children as young as 12 years old for scouts and ambushes. From the air, the age of the target was impossible to determine. When the M60 machine gun opened up, the gunner saw only muzzle flashes and dirt clouds. They fired into the tree line and hoped for a hit. The mission was suppression. Accuracy was secondary to volume. Gunners used tracer rounds to mark enemy positions for the pilots. Bright red streaks cut through the canopy. They threw colored smoke grenades to designate landing zones. The goal was simple: keep the enemy's head down until the troops hit the ground. The sound of the machine gun drowned out everything else. Thus began the cycle of the combat sortie. The hot landing zone was the most dangerous location in Vietnam. In these zones, the aircraft entered the direct line of fire. Door gunners had to respond instantly. They opened fire before the skids even touched the grass. Their task was to suppress the tree line while troops jumped from the cabin. Why was this role so lethal? The gunners were exposed. While they sprayed the jungle with lead, they became the primary targets for snipers and RPG teams. They had to balance two things: total suppression and ammo management. Running out of bullets in the middle of a hot extraction meant certain death for everyone on board. The noise inside the Huey was deafening. The roar of the engine mixed with the rhythmic thud of the M60 machine gun. In this chaos, mistakes happened. One young gunner spotted a wounded enemy soldier after a firefight. He acted on impulse. He jumped out of the moving helicopter to provide medical aid to the man he had just been shooting at. He didn't tell his crew. He simply vanished from his post. When he turned around, the helicopter was already several hundred feet in the air, banking away. The gunner was left alone. He stood in the mud for 30 minutes, unarmed, standing over a dying enemy in the heart of hostile territory. His crew eventually noticed the empty seat and circled back. He survived the war, but the reprimand was severe. Other incidents ended in body bags. Safety straps were the only thing keeping gunners inside the aircraft during high-speed banks. Sometimes the buckles failed. Sometimes, in the rush of combat, they forgot to hook themselves in. If the pilot pulled a hard maneuver, the gunner simply fell into the void. One gunner fell from a low altitude during a sharp turn. He didn't hit the ground. He landed directly on top of two Viet Cong soldiers. The impact knocked the breath out of all three men. The gunner recovered first. He grabbed an enemy rifle, killed both soldiers, and waited for extraction. He received a medal for bravery for a move he never intended to make. The footage from these missions shows a brutal reality. In many cases, door gunners were hit by heavy caliber rounds but refused to stop firing. They slumped over their weapons, bleeding out, while still pulling the trigger to protect the men in the back. Medical evacuations, or medevacs, were the worst. These missions required flying directly into the center of an ambush to retrieve the wounded. The door gunners had to act as human shields for the medics. They flew into a wall of lead to save people they didn't even know. The rhythm of the war was psychological torture. Veterans described the experience as 90% boredom and 10% pure terror. They spent hours staring at the green, silent canopy of the jungle. Then, in a split second, the world exploded into tracers and screams. The casualty rate for door gunners was among the highest in the entire conflict. They saw their friends torn apart by gunfire inches away from them. This constant cycle of boredom, followed by extreme violence, shattered many men. Most survivors returned home with severe combat fatigue or permanent post-traumatic stress. The era of the door gunner was defined by high stakes and short life expectancies. The mission ended only when the helicopter returned to base or crashed in the trees.